Lynn. I know it's a Sunday night and it's a challenging time for people to be here. So I just wanted to thank everyone for being here, and we'll just go ahead and get the program started if everyone is ready. Okay. So good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the Arlington Democrats, who is sponsoring this amazing book presentation you'll be part of this evening. My name's Fatima Argan, and I'm the chair of the Interfaith Outreach and Advocacy Caucus. Our caucus organizes events to primarily bring communities together and focuses around the faith community in and around Arlington, but has expanded its reach to Nova, the DMV, and beyond as we seek to enlighten our communities about our respective faith traditions and help them to come together and work as a community toward common goals that benefit us all. I'm proud to say the Interfaith Caucus is in its fourth year, and if you'll allow me to brag, I'll tell you a little bit more about our group. We actually started out as the American Muslim Caucus, primarily to support the American Muslim community following Trump's infamous Muslim ban. We realized that there are policies being made that affected this group that were not aligned with our democratic values of respect and inclusiveness for all. And with that, we went forward with our first Interfaith Eid celebration, which was a resounding success. And along the way, we realized that, much of our content was oriented around interfaith activities. And it really just became made much more sense to rename ourselves the Interfaith Caucus. And since then, we've organized many activities designed to create a sense of community, not only along faith institutions in Arlington, but bringing in other communities as well. So I'm thrilled to say that we are now in our fourth year, and we will be having our signature Interfaith Eid celebration for the fourth year in a row this July 25th at an outdoor venue in Arlington. So you are all invited, and I would encourage you to invite anybody else. It's an in-person event. Hopefully we will not have to wear masks by then, but if we do, we will comply with all health regulations. And we're just thrilled to have a robust in-person event again. So we just wanted to give you a heads up. It's coming, and look for it. Mark it on your calendars. Look for it in the invite on our Facebook group page, which we also invite you to join. One of my co-hosts will put the link for our Facebook group page in the chat box shortly. So we invite you to join if you're not already a member. And so at this time, I also want to give a shout out to my amazing interfaith team, who's worked diligently to put these events, including tonight's event, together. And if I miss anyone, please shout out and let me know, because I want to make sure that you all get credit. You do an amazing job. Alexandra Ritchie, who you may already have met, Ken Spiker, Debbie Bezenson, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name, Bezenson, Abe Henry, Michael Shea, Anika Rothman, so many others have contributed their amazing talents and resources to help us put these great events together. So with that, I'd like to introduce the program tonight. This will be the second in our series on challenging hate, bigotry, and racism. The first one we did was included Congressman Don Beyer, and Walter was also one of the panelists on that panel as well. So this is number two. We promised that we would have more than one, and here we are, and we'll be having many more. Tonight, we'll be presenting you with a book talk with two dear friends, Sabiha Rahman and Walter Ruby, who have written a book that speaks to the heart of what it means to bring community together. At the heart of bringing people and communities together lies a very important element, trust, and that can only happen when we see each other as individuals and see each other's commonalities and humanity. As many of you have been undoubtedly following events in the Middle East, you realize that things have reached a point of great intensity and great concern. And as you will see from tonight's book discussion, books like the one that Sabiha and Walter have jointly and lovingly co-authored are more important than ever. And with that, I will turn it over to them and to let them tell you more about their book. The floor is yours.
Fatima, thank you so much. That was really beautifully stated. I mean that deeply. So I think Sabia and I wanted to start tonight in a way we don't normally do, and we've been doing our book talks, which is to tell you a little bit about what we're feeling about what's happening right now, and then go into the larger discussion. So, like countless other American Jews and Muslims and many other people of all backgrounds, Sabia and I have been truly devastated, and I would say even traumatized by the events of the past week in Israel and Palestine. Together, we appeal for an end to violence in Israel-Palestine and for a just solution to the conflict, guaranteeing peace, security, and self-determination for every Palestinian and Israeli. We believe that all efforts to evict Palestinian families from their homes in Jerusalem and elsewhere should end, and sacred spaces must be respected, whether it is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam, which has been repeatedly invaded by Israeli security forces, or synagogues in Lod in Israel that were burned to the ground by rampaging mobs. We pledge, having said that, we want to say that we pledge as Jews, Muslims, and allies that we will not allow the conflict in Israel-Palestine to tear apart our alliance here in America. We are brothers and sisters who love and respect each other and are committed to standing up for each other whenever either community is under attack. We will redouble at this moment, we pledge to redouble our efforts to fight together against Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, all forms of bigotry, including the growing white supremacist ideology that is a deadly threat to both of our communities. And we will continue to speak out in defense of democracy and pluralism here in America. We need each other. So Sabia, can you start us off?
Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Fatima, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you, Alexandria and Ken, for making this possible. I grew up in Pakistan. And in all those years, I had never met a Jew. My impression and perception about Jews was colored by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Pakistan has not, until today, recognized the state of Israel. And my father's passport was stamped, all countries of the world except Israel. And that is literally and figuratively where I came from when I came to the United States. Walter, how about you?
Well, I had never met a Muslim until well into my 20s. I grew up as a lonely Jewish child in a predominantly Gentile Pittsburgh suburb. I was deeply moved by the book Exodus, which was about some of you may remember, it was about the creation of the state of Israel, and moved me greatly. And then suddenly, like a good fairy, suddenly appeared and gave me my deepest wish. And I'm now 11 years old at this point. I found out that our family was going to go and live in Israel for a year, that my father had a sabbatical at the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot. He was a physicist. So we went and we spent, I had my 6th grade year in Israel. I totally bonded with the place. I fell deeply in love. I felt deeply at home and connected to my true self. And it was, it was sort of informed the rest of my life and moved me in that direction. I had no, at that time, however, interactions with Palestinians, either Christians or Muslims. We came back to the States after 1 year, but I vowed to return to live there. Sabia?
So when I came to the United States in December 1971, my husband, who was a resident physician, took me to the hospital's Christmas party. Half of his colleagues were Pakistanis, Indians, and the other half were Jewish. And as I started talking to them, his Jewish colleagues were asking me, like, how are you adjusting? Is everything all right? Can we be of any help? We hope you're not feeling lonely. And I was quite surprised by the contradiction, because I had always viewed Jews as the bad guys. And here they were being very good to me. They were all very nice. And then I find out that my upstairs neighbor, who took me under her wing, was Jewish. When I got pregnant, my obstetrician was Jewish. When I had a baby, the pediatrician was Jewish. And then I moved into an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood. And when I went ringing doorbells on Saturday to introduce myself to my neighbors, I couldn't understand why they weren't answering the door. Eventually, I found out why. And my father, who was visiting from Pakistan, said to me that people of faith, no matter what their faith, make good neighbors. And this community will be good for you because they will raise their children well, they will have good values, they will be disciplined in their way of life, and this will be good for you and your family. And he was right. I actually got a bonus out of it because not only did I make good friends, but I no longer had to explain to my children why we don't have a Christmas tree or why we don't eat pork, because everyone around them was doing the same thing. So we were a minority amongst a minority, and it was working out very well for me. Walter, how about your first encounter?
Well, I went back to Israel. I went back to Israel at the age of 26, and I then spent the next 3 years living there, which were really, I think, some of the happiest, most fulfilling of my life. I became a journalist at that point, and I was based in Haifa, writing mainly for the Jerusalem Post and other papers. And I covered many stories in the north of Israel and the Galilee, especially visiting Palestinian Israeli villages, Israeli-Palestinian, I should say, which showed me the systematic discrimination being endured by Palestinian citizens of Israel. And so I saw that, and I learned something else that was very important, because when I came to those villages, I was so warmly received. I was there to cover the story, but I think people were genuinely moved that I actually came as a Jew and I was ready to hear their side of the story. It didn't happen very often. And and it was very, very powerful. And then when I would go back to Haifa or to visit my cousins on a kibbutz nearby, they tended to say, well, they're just pulling the wool over your eyes. You think they're so nice and hospitable, but when you turn your back, they might put a knife in it. They didn't necessarily mean that literally, but that was kind of the extent of it. And the main point was that we understand the Arabs. You don't. You're just a naive American. And finally, after a while, I said, well, when were you last in the village of Ibalin, for example, where I'd had some very powerful encounters? And my uncle actually, who was an old timer who had come there in the 40s, said, well, I was there once in 1943. But then he said, but you don't, so but don't think you understand. Just because you were there last week and I was there 25 years ago doesn't mean that you get it. You don't get it. What I did finally understand is that I got something very important, which has informed the rest of my life, which is the power of personal connections, the transformative meaning, the power of personal encounters, and that really became what I've been about. Because, I ultimately did get to know the Arabs in Israel in a way that most of my Israeli Jewish compatriots didn't. Because I did go out there and have those encounters. So that informed kind of what I'm doing today. Sabia?
So what informed what I am doing today started as interfaith dialogue by the sidewalk. I was a homemaker raising 2 boys, and I would be hanging out with my Jewish neighbors. We would be standing on the lawn, and I guess that's where grassroots came from. We'd be watching our children ride their bicycles, and I must have invited them in for dinner, and the conversation must have led to dietary laws. Oh, so you don't eat pork either. Or someone may have invited me in for a cup of coffee, and I would have excused myself saying, I'm sorry, but it's Ramadan. What is that? And that's how we got engaged in interfaith dialogue, very informally. After a while, I felt that I wanted my Jewish friends to meet my Muslim friends from Pakistan, because I didn't want them to believe that I was unique or that I was not like the rest of them kind of Muslims, an outlier. I wanted them to see the others as well. And likewise, I wanted my Muslim Pakistani friends to see how nice Jewish women are, or Jewish men and women. So we started meeting in my home over dinner, and then eventually it expanded into halls and into places of worship and into larger venues. And we just continued to expand until it started getting formalized. Walter, how was your experience?
Well, I came back to the States in 1980. I was working as a journalist. I continued working as a journalist, mainly based in New York, but covering the Israeli-Palestinian peace process for many years. And that was what I did. And then in the early 2000s, after the peace process crashed and burned tragically, I became interested in Muslim-Jewish coalition building in the US as an alternative path, perhaps, to peace and reconciliation. I attended an amazing event in 2006, the World Congress of Imams and Rabbis, which took place in Seville, Spain. And it was really, really revealing because they were communicating in a wonderful way. They were having kind of all-night rap sessions with ouds and guitars, and they were talking and they were sharing, and learning what was going on in the other, the similarities in the other faith. And it was really quite very powerful. And I suddenly thought, religiously observant Jews and Muslims, who I kind of before that considered to be a big part of the problem, could be a big part of the solution. But what I understood is we really need a grassroots movement focused on Muslims and Jews speaking directly to each other, as that was going on in Seville, and connecting on a personal level. I was very fortunate several years later in 2008 to be hired by Rabbi Mark Schneier at the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding as Muslim-Jewish Program Director. And I stayed there for about 10 years. And it was an endlessly fascinating job, because my job really was kind of as a matchmaker. I mean, I would go to all these different cities around the States and also in Europe and connect up rabbis and imams, or Muslim and Jewish student groups or women's groups, try to get them to do joint events together, twinning events, we called them. And anyway, that's what I did for a living, so I was this, and sometimes I'd be on a plane late at night flying to LA or, somewhere else. And I'd be sitting and talking to the person sitting in the next seat, so what do you do? They would ask me, or all of that. And I'd say, well, I twin Muslims and Jews. And so the person would usually either go there would be this expression of incredulity for a minute. And then often they would say something like, oh my God, that must be the worst job in the world. And what I said with absolute conviction was, this is the best job in the world. Yes, there are challenges and setbacks, but it's unbelievably fulfilling for me to bring together grassroots Muslims and Jews and watch them connect, recognize their commonalities, and build ties, which make it possible for them to work together. So it really felt to me like holy work. Sabia, can you tell us a little bit about some of the ground rules?
Yeah, so for the best job in the world, we did have some ground rules, yes, which was that we would focus on commonalities, our shared heritage, and our shared values. And we would keep politics out of it. We would agree to disagree respectfully, but not discuss the Middle East conflict. Rather focus on working here at home for things that are important to us. In fact, one of the organizations, the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom that I belong to, has the rule that for at least 18 months, we not talk politics, so that we can give relationships a chance to develop and to gel. Did you have the same rules, Walter?
A little bit different, although similar. We had at the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding a formula for trying to prevent the Israeli-Palestinian situation to kind of mess up our twinning encounters over here, which was we would urge the rabbi and the imam of the, say, if a temple and a mosque were connecting, were doing a twinning, we would ask them to offer a prayer for peace and reconciliation and justice in Israel-Palestine, something like what Sabia and I just did. But probably more spiritual, and we would, and they would do that, and it usually had a very positive impact. But then we would say at the end of that, the focus of our meeting tonight is Muslim-Jewish relations in Washington, D.C., in Los Angeles, Toronto, London, where it was taking, and therefore that's what this is going to be about from now on, because this is holy work in itself. This is really vital work, and we can't allow the conflict to kind of pull us apart. So that formula worked pretty well most of the time. So Sabia and I met around 2009, and what happened was that I had been working with many Muslim organizations, including the American Society for Muslim Advancement, ASMA Society. I called over there in around that time to speak with the founder and president, Daisy Khan, but I got Sabia on the phone instead. So we developed a friendly relationship, I should say, at that time, but had no idea where the relationship would take us a few years later.
So where it took us a few years later was that there was an interfaith iftar being held at Temple Emmanuel, and I had registered me and my husband. When I walked in there, a Muslim gentleman was handling the registration. And he looked at me and said, "You have not registered. I don't have your names on the list. And I cannot register you now because we are full." So I, said that, but I did register. And he said, "Sorry, we are full." Walter just happened to be standing by and intervened and said, "Look, I've known Sabia for a long time. And, if she says she's registered, you can let them in." So eventually Walter prevailed and we were allowed to enter. And I chuckled to my husband that the Muslim man wasn't letting us in and the Jewish man did. Where that eventually took us is that in 2016, I was getting ready for my memoir to be published, Threading My Prayer Rug. And I realized that I did not have a blurb from a rabbi. And I thought of Walter. Now, Walter is not a rabbi, but he worked for one. I was in Pakistan. I sent him an email and I said, "Walter, I've written this book. And do you think that Rabbi Schneier would be willing to write a blurb?" And Walter said, "I have to read the book." So I emailed him the manuscript. And this nice Jewish gentleman spent his day of rest on Saturday going through the whole manuscript. And then he wrote back and he said, "Not only will the rabbi be happy to write a blurb, but Sabiha, I have an idea. Why don't we write a book together?" Right, Walter?
Right. So why did I do that? First of all, I thought it was an amazing book. It was brilliantly written. For those of you like Lorraine who know it well, it was great. And I had been looking for a Muslim co-author, obviously somebody who could write also, because I'd been wanting for some time to write a book about our Muslim Jewish movement and share an account of our success. And also, we wanted something, and especially now, 2016, 2017, we wanted a manifesto of why a Muslim-Jewish alliance is so needed at this moment of history when both of our communities feel threatened by the rise of bigotry and authoritarianism. One point that we often make is, don't forget, these are the two largest minority communities in America, religious minority communities in America. And as such, we must stand together in support of democracy, human rights, and religious freedom, all of which make Muslim and Jewish life viable in this country. So that was how we got started. Then we sat down, Sabi and I sat down, okay, what are we going to write about? And we realized that we have 4 principles that are very, very vital to the work we have done and are doing. So we wanted to go through those very quickly. The first one is what we call save a life, the principle that is in both the Talmud and the Quran, that if you save one life, it is as though you save all of humanity. But the interesting thing was, so that's in both of those books, but I didn't know that until when I started getting involved in this work in 2007. There was a moment where I was covering an event in New York City while I was still a journalist at that time. A young man named Hassan Askari, a Bangladeshi Muslim immigrant, was being honored because he had jumped into, there had been a situation on the New York City subway late at night where some hoodlums, some skidheads accosted several Jews and began actually cursing them and then beating them. Hassan jumped into the fray and broke it up, really, and got a couple of black eyes in the process, but he became but he pulled the security cord, the police rushed on, and so to make a long story short, he's being honored. Absolutely, it was a wonderful event. And suddenly I hear someone say, as it says in the Quran, Hassan is kind of emblematic. If you save one life, it is as though you saved the world. And so I had never realized that it was in the Quran, and it illuminated something for me, that at the heart of Islam, like the heart of Judaism, there's a commitment to mercy, compassion, justice, and the preciousness of every single life. Sabia, what about you?
Yeah, I, like Walter, didn't know this either. I was at a Holocaust Remembrance Day, which I and a group of Muslim women had organized. And when one of the women started making a speech saying, it is our responsibility to make sure this never happens again. And then she quoted from the Quran, if you save one life, it's as if you saved the world. And then one of the Jewish gentlemen spoke up and said, but that is similar to our scripture. And then he quoted the Talmud. And that's when I heard it for the first time. I had no idea. And it was almost in the same words, as if God was simply reissuing the same edict centuries later, like a copy and paste. We were all surprised, but then why are we surprised? After all, it's the same God and issuing the same message to his prophets. So that was the first principle that unites us. The second one is welcome the stranger. I quote from the Quran, those who migrate for the sake of God shall find many places for refuge in the land of great abundance. And Leviticus, the strangers who sojourn with you shall be to you as natives among you, and you shall love them as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. My mother was a stranger in the land of Pakistan. My mother was a refugee. In 1947, when India was partitioned into India and Pakistan, she made the train trip from India to her new homeland, almost got killed on the way. And the detail of that, I don't have the time to go into, but we talk about that in the book. But when she made it across to her new land, she was welcomed there. She made her home there. That's where she lived. That's where she thrived. That's where she flourished. And that's where she died. And until the day she passed away, she believed that if there was one place on God's earth that was made for her, it was Pakistan. Now, when I fast forward to 2017, the Muslim ban has been issued. And the rabbi from our neighborhood synagogue calls my husband and says, we stand by you in solidarity, and I would like to visit a mosque to show my solidarity. So my husband took him to the 96th Street Mosque. And just as he walked in, he said, should I remove my kippah? No, keep it on. He stood shoulder to shoulder with all the Muslims in the congregation, said the Jummah Friday prayers, and looking very much a Jewish person. And when the prayers were over, people lined up to come up and shake his hand and say, thank you. One man walked up to him and said, I wish I could give you a gift, but I don't have anything on me. The only thing I have is a family heirloom. And he held up his prayer beads and he said, this is my family heirloom and I would like you to have it. Those are the sentiments that were expressed in solidarity with us. Walter, now your mother was also a refugee, correct?
She was indeed. My mother was a refugee from Nazi Germany, born in Berlin. And at the age of 14 in 1938, late 1938, she and her mother fled across the Belgian border on foot and went through a 3-year journey between then and when they finally arrived in America, through France, through Portugal, running from the Nazis. The Nazis invaded France, they ran to Portugal, and then they were sort of stuck there for 9 months, thinking the Nazis could come any day, but they couldn't get their US visas because there was a strict quota on Jewish immigration at that time, as many of you know, and so many Jews who might have been saved were not, because America was not willing to open its doors at that point. And it was the first manifestation of America First. So when my mother and grandmother got here on the boat, they were not really even supposed to be staying. They were supposed to be going on to Ecuador, where they had visas to. My grandmother was taken into the city by someone from HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, who found a New York City judge who signed an affidavit saying they were his relatives. He had the same last name. I don't think they actually were his relatives, but it was thanks to his what he did that saved them and made it possible for them to stay here. And so then my mother had a very long life in America. She loved it deeply. She was involved in many causes, the Democratic Party being one of them, and the League of Women Voters, and many others. And so I was, and before she passed in 2004, I was asked, as Sabia was talking about, I spoke, I think it was in 2018, in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. This was a rally against the Muslim ban. The Supreme Court was about to rule on it. And so I told this story at greater length that day. The story obviously is in our book. But I said, you know what, when I hear this demonization of illegals, like they're some kind of subhumans, I said, when my mother arrived on Ellis Island, and by the way, I should have said, while my grandmother was taken to see that judge and was saved, my mother was held as surety on Ellis Island for 2 weeks. So anyway, my mother was an illegal too, and don't dehumanize people. And obviously, it was a horrible ruling by the Supreme Court, and thank God President Biden has now effaced it. So wanted to move on to the third principle, which we call Islah and Tikkun Olam. Islah is the Arabic word for reform in the sense of improve and better or put something in a better position. Tikkun Olam in Hebrew means repairing the world. And so those are the very, very important in the work that we do. In other words, social action, helping people in need, feeding the homeless, visiting the sick, doing health fairs. We try to bring Muslims and Jews to take those acts together. And both Sabia and I were inspired by a man named Zamir Hassan, who runs a group called Muslims Against Hunger. And he spends every day, from the time he retired from his day job, and I think about 15 years ago, he has been spent every day of his life since then feeding hungry people all over the US. And he always said to me, look, it's great for us Muslims, Jews to get together, have conversations about our faiths and, read our holy books or do whatever. But in my mind, he said, it's much better if we stand at a homeless shelter together with our food aprons on, ladling out hot soup to homeless people, and we'll bond in that process. And so that had a big effect on me, to live out together our moral imperative to help those who are most in need. Sabia?
And we had the same experience, for example, in the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom. On Christmas Day, the Muslim and Jewish women and men and children, we will go to the church and give our Christian brethren the day off and stand in the soup kitchen and ladle out the food to the homeless. And it's one thing to be doing an act of charity that makes you feel good about yourself. But when you're doing it together with people of another faith, when your hands soiled hands are rubbing against one another, you're shoulder to shoulder, you wonder if you're really that different. So the final fourth principle that we're going to be talking about that unites us is standing up for one another. And never for me did it become more apparent than it did after the travel ban was issued in 2017. Particularly when on a Sunday morning, I walked into Times Square, me and my husband, and we were surrounded by people. It was a cold Sunday, February morning, and people were holding posters that said, "Today I am a Muslim too," except that they were not Muslims. They were there for us. And as I walked through the crowd, I came across a lady sitting in a wheelchair who must have been in her 90s. She could barely hold her head up. And looking at her, I wondered what it took for her to be there. Somebody had to have helped her get into her woolies, put her in a wheelchair, wheeled her out of her building, put her in a cab, folded her wheelchair, put it in the trunk, all of that, all over again in reverse when she got to the destination, got her out, wheeled her into Times Square. And she did all that. Her protest in silence, louder than everybody else. This was a Sunday, and the thousands of people could have been anywhere on their day off, but they choose to come and stand out in the cold. And then, soon after that, the tables were reversed. And now it was our turn to stand up for our Jewish cousins. Right, Walter?
Absolutely. Standing up for the other has really been the kind of the cardinal principle. that has animated the work that I've done. The Foundation for Ethnic Understanding has done since from 2008 onward. But as Sophia said, where it really hit home, and that I felt it was incredibly powerful emotionally, obviously, was in 2018, after the attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, the murderous attack by a neo-Nazi who shot down 11 Jews at prayer. This, by the way, was my own hometown, as I may have mentioned. And, so I remember watching CNN that day and suddenly having this realization, for the first time in my entire life, I don't feel safe as a Jew in America, which was a terrible feeling, because this had never happened before. But almost immediately, there was reportage on CNN and elsewhere that the Muslims in Pittsburgh, the leaders of the Muslim community, had rushed over to the synagogue, and they were standing outside and they were just saying, "We're with you, we love you, tell us what we can do." And that was very powerful. And then over the next couple of days, hundreds of thousands of dollars were raised by Muslims across America for the stricken Pittsburgh Jewish community. So that was hugely moving and meaningful to me. And then, there were the following Shabbat, Saturday, there were services in synagogues around the country in commemorating this terrible event, and people, but in many of these cases, people from outside the community were invited. Many thousands and thousands of Muslims came to events around America. I was at one at Temple Road of Shalom, not far from you, in Falls Church, and I think about a third of the people in that synagogue must have been Muslim. It was incredible, and in the synagogue packed to the rafters, as you can imagine. I was standing next to one Muslim man, about 40, and he had his two small children with him, and they were listening to all this spellbound. And I turned to him, I said, "I'm really, really moved you're here. But is this difficult for your children to hear all this?" These were, 10-year-old and 8-year-old. And he said, no, I have to be here, and I want them to be. I have to be here when my neighbors are attacked, and I want them to see this too. I want them to learn this lesson. And it was, that was incredibly moving. I remember I just reached out and we hugged each other. And so that's the spirit that we need to carry forward. Very, very powerful.
Yeah, and carrying that spirit forward hasn't always been easy. These were examples of success stories, but we've had our share of challenges. Speaking for myself, I felt that the biggest challenge that I and many people like me have faced has been the difficulty in getting Muslim participation in interfaith dialogue and in interfaith activism. And I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure whether it's because we, meaning the Muslim community, hasn't yet evolved to a stage where activism becomes a part of their life, whether it is the immigrant trajectory that they're not there yet, they are running to getting their children, picking them up from school, dropping them off at soccer games, all of that, or whether it is lack of trust. I don't know, and I can't put my finger on it, but it has been a challenge for us to get them involved. Walter, how about you?
Yeah, well, as I said, in the work I've done around the country, I've seen some cities where the Muslims have been more hesitant and some cities where the Jews have been more hesitant. So it hasn't really been a one-way street. And one example was Boston, where one wealthy donor to the Jewish Federation really kind of kept screaming that this particular mosque was somehow Muslim Brotherhood, which was totally untrue, but scared off the mainstream Jewish community. So that was one. But they're really, all of these challenges I think come around two main, what we call elephants in the room. The first one is, of course, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I've seen, as I said, I've seen quite a few twinnings, some twinnings, I'm not sure the number, a fair number of twinnings go south over the years after outbreaks of violence like we're seeing today. And what's happened is, in the past especially, people often pulled back in that situation and they just didn't pick up the phone, whether it was the imam or the rabbi. These are people who have developed relationships, good working relationships. They become friends, but they just didn't know what to say, when this happened. And there's a natural human tendency to want to avoid, conflict. And so that often took us months to get it going. It's actually one of the things that's been very encouraging now is we've seen in a number of cases, Muslim Jewish groups like the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom and New Ground out in Los Angeles are issuing powerful statements. They're connecting, they are communicating. So that's been really, really great to see, but it's still obviously a problem. There's another elephant too, which is doctrines in our respective holy books that offend the other. And here, I would say talk personally a little bit, which is that I've told many of my Muslim friends that how the Jews are presented in the Quran has made me uncomfortable, because it felt to me when I read the Quran in English that there's a lot there where it's kind of angrily condemning the children of Israel for betraying God during their sojourn in the desert around after the Exodus, worshiping the golden calf, not obeying God, but that's said in very forceful terms. And when I would bring this up with my Muslim friends, including some learned imams, they would say, but Walter, it says almost the exact same thing in the Torah, that the children of Israel disobeyed God. And I said, and I thought about it and I said, they're right about that. That is true. But the problem is with these kinds of things that it comes down to human psychology that, as I'm sure many groups, I'm pretty sure most groups, that it's okay to kind of criticize yourself, your own group, or laugh at yourself, or humor, but God forbid somebody else should do that, and then you get very offended, and that's what was happening there. But the main thing is that the most important thing is to have that conversation the way I was able to talk to the imams or talk to Sabia about this and have honest and uplifting conversations, and that really is what it's really, really all about. So, Sabia, do you want to talk about finally the lessons we've learned to kind of sum up the?
Yeah. And before I go there, Walter and I actually debate and dialogue on both these issues that we call the two elephants in the room in our book. So yeah, we'd like to share with you finally some of the lessons that we have learned. First, we are Americans first. And why the Israeli-Palestinian conflict issue matters greatly, and we're all going through that pain right now because it matters greatly. But we also recognize that we live here, and this is our common homeland. And America is threatened unless we unite to save democracy and pluralism here at home. Walter, can you walk us through a few more of the lessons learned?
Sure. So one thing is to speak out and stay engaged together in injustice, both at home and abroad. So there's certainly a place for Muslims and Jews to speak out in support of human rights and democracy, obviously here at home, as we've said, but in other parts of the world as well. Let's speak out together on behalf of groups like the Rohingyas who have been brutalized, the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar who have experienced genocide. The Uyghurs are going through that right now. And also on issues related to Israel-Palestine and, in the Arab world, like in Saudi Arabia, human rights issues. If we can find common ground on that, I think it's great to be able to do that. But coming back to Israel-Palestine one last time, we can actually do work from here. We can do something from here that actually can make a difference on the ground. We can support NGOs in Israel and Palestine that are really working to improve conditions on the ground. And that's very, very important. I've been involved with a group called Project Rosanna, which is helping get Palestinian children who are sick with cancer, who are living in the West Bank and also in Gaza, getting them to hospitals in Israel. We've developed a whole system of volunteer drivers to accomplish that. That's one tiny example, but I've been involved in getting American Jews and Muslims engaged in supporting Project Rosanna, and it kind of gives us some skin in the game. We know that we are saving lives by doing this. And so, what's better, to make a difference to save lives, or to have the 613th sterile discussion about who's right and who's wrong? And it brings us closer here at home. So that's another one. We need to allow others to speak out. People Muslims allow Jews, Jews allow Muslims to speak up, whether we agree or not. We need to hear them and give them that space. And I'm talking now about there was a lot of opposition in the last Congress when Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib kind of came on and said a lot of things, certainly in support of Palestine. Some of them felt insensitive to Jews. But the main point that I want to make is, it seems to me, and I think this is very important, we need to acknowledge they have as much right to advocate for Palestine in the halls of Congress as do Jewish members like Chuck Schumer or Ben Cardin, or there's so many others, so many Jewish representatives, 40 or more, I think, in Congress. They have the right to speak up for Israel. So we need to get that message. Also very important, we should not allow Israel-Palestine to be weaponized in ways that do tear us apart. And that's a very, and that's not, that doesn't necessarily happen by happenstance. You know, that certainly that was the whole thing that Trump was doing with his you know, attacks on Tlaib and Omar, telling them to go back where they came from. Another example is efforts to criminalize the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which seeks to put an economic cost on Israel for its occupation. Now, I don't personally agree with BDS on many aspects, because for various reasons, which I could go into if we need to. So, but I'm not a supporter of BDS, but in recent years, I am deeply troubled by efforts to criminalize it, where there are even cases where people have lost their jobs, you know, because I'm thinking, for example, a speech therapist in Austin, Texas, a Palestinian American woman was actually terminated from her contract with the school district because the state of Texas said that it was against the law to advocate a boycott of Israel, so she refused to sign some piece of paper, so they fired her. So that should not happen. So those are, Sylvia, can you give us a few more?
Yeah, so the sixth lesson we learned was, let's not denigrate or demonize people on either side. Activists like Linda Sarsour correctly demand that they be able to speak freely as Palestinian Americans, but we disagree when Zionists are demonized. Number 7, Muslims should engage with mainstream American Jews who consider themselves Zionists, rather than allying exclusively with anti-Zionist fringe groups like Jewish Voices for Peace. Jews should engage with Muslims like Tlaib, Omar, and Sarsour. We need to dialogue with people whom we may disagree with on the Middle East issue, but agree with on many other issues here at home that are dear to us, including advocating for diversity, freedom of speech, and democracy. And finally, let's be cautious about labeling one another as anti-Semitic or Islamophobic. We acknowledge the sensitivities on both sides. Criticizing Israeli policies or political leaders is just that, a criticism of the policy and policymakers. It is not a declaration against Jews. Likewise, being critical of the leaders or policies of Muslim countries does not translate into Islamophobia. Yet, we do need to be keenly aware of the sensitivities so that our statements are not construed as being either Islamophobic or anti-Semitic, particularly if they are not meant as such. And with that, we conclude the formal part of our presentation and would like to now engage with you for any questions that you may have. And thank you for listening.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Sabiha and Walter. I just feel so grateful to you for all of the really amazing and important work you do. And grateful as well to be able to say, you know, to call you both friends. One thing I'll just note before we go into our questions is I'm heartened to see that there are a number of Sisterhood of Salam Shalom members here. Some of them came on after we introduced Sabiha as a Sister of Salam Shalom, member of one of the Manhattan chapters. I too am a Sisterhood of Salam Shalom member. I'm also the co-founder and former co-lead of the Arlington, Virginia chapter. I see Lorraine Check, who is one of my sisters in another Manhattan chapter. And I think that's it. Did I see? I thought there was another one, but maybe not. So it's great to see you all here. I'm also heartened to see that we have that I see at least 2 alums, 3 actually, if you count Alexandra, but she's not, but both Audrey and Andrea were in my class at the LBJ school in graduate school. So welcome to you both. Say hi, guys or girls. Take yourselves off mute.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe they
Hey,
don't want to.
Fatima, so proud of the work you're doing. It's really wonderful.
Thank you, Andrea. And Audrey, if you're there, it'd be great to hear from you too.
The program is wonderful, and I'm looking forward to hearing about the discussion and people's questions.
Thank you. Thank you. One other thing I wanted to say, and, certainly don't want to pressure anybody to do this, but we would invite you if, if you don't have a bandwidth issue, or if you feel comfortable, obviously, to go ahead and put yourselves on video. Again, no pressure. It would just be nice to see your lovely faces, and I think it would add to a more lively discussion. So just want to point out a few ground rules before we ask the questions. Obviously, I don't think I need to say that to this crowd, but it's just a general thing that I say whenever I facilitate a discussion is please use decorum and be, and respect when you ask questions. I don't anticipate any issues on that end from this crowd. So I'll just go ahead and take some questions.
Fatima, I would like to share something. I started out by saying how very much I needed this discussion tonight, how we're all feeling. We are having a meeting of the Sisterhood of our chapter on Tuesday, and we have prepared a poem. We start our chapter first with a meditation, and then with a poem, and then we go on, and then with a prayer, and then we go on to whatever it is we're discussing. And we have prepared a new prayer, which I would like to share, if you don't mind.
Please do, yes.
It's called A Kaddish as a Prayer of Love. For the dead and for the mourners, and for the many holding the mourners, for those struck bombs, by bullets, by broken bottles, for the frightened, for the furious, for the forgotten, for us, for all. Today, some mourn, all memorialize. Today, some recite, all respond. May the great names of those who have been cradled by the great name that cradles us. May we cradle one another as we pray this prayer of love.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
That cradling
Very
really
Yes.
got to me.
Yes.
I think one of the things we're all really craving right now, in addition to the hugs we've been deprived of, for some of us for about a year, over a year now, is just some comfort, some voices of caring and love, especially because, it is such an intense and disturbing thing that we're kind of all dealing with right now. So I thank you so much for those beautiful words, Lorraine. Yeah.
Lorraine, post it on the Sisterhood Facebook page. We need those words.
Yes. Yes.
And feel
As
free
I
to
needed this talk of yours and your book. So we cradled one another.
Yes.
Yeah.
We do.
Well, feel free to post it on our Arlington Dems Interfaith Caucus page too. Yeah.
Yes.
we can always use wonderful, loving messages like the one that you just presented. So did anyone else have any thoughts or questions?
Well, I just wanted to say, as a man, the incredible contribution of the sisterhood to the Muslim-Jewish alliance that we've built over these years. It's just been huge, and that kind of love and compassion that women are able to express and to feel in sometimes ways men don't. But it's a huge contribution to what we've done and where hopefully we're going. And very proud of the sisterhood and all of you.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank
Did anybody else have any questions?
If it's okay, I have a question.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sabiha, and thank you, Walter, for your wisdom and sharing your personal journeys. I was wondering, through your work together or separately, and also this question can be directed to the sisterhood members as well. Have you done any work with children or university students? Is there a model of what you've worked on that can be replicated for different age groups? Because we're all adults in this particular meeting, but we want to make sure that the younger generations are also empowered to have these conversations as well. So just wondering if you could share anything from your experience or any thoughts you have about how that might be done.
So starting with the sisterhood, and thank you for that question, they have a teen track. It started off with, the women, and then eventually they developed a teen program. And these are high school students who are taking it to a whole other level and have all kinds of programming that they engage in. So there's that happening, and that's happening at the national level. Other examples that we have encountered, we recently did a talk in the Rumi Forum that, Fatma, you were at, and that was geared entirely to the youth, where they had college students organize this program actually to address the prejudices that they face from externally, from without, and also from within, towards one another and towards the other. And in that context, Walter and I had done a talk. It was a book talk, but it was focused primarily on prejudices that each of us has faced within and from without, after which they went into breakout rooms and were going to, hash it all out. So one other model. Then there have been academic institutions that have been inviting me and Walter to come and give talks. One of the first ones we did was at the St. Francis College in New York City, in Brooklyn. We then did one at the Carroll University in Wisconsin. And I can't remember any others, but we have done book talks targeted to college and university students. Walter, what else?
Well, I was just going to say we have a very exciting one coming up next. I guess it's November. That Professor Akbar Ahmed, world-renowned professor of Islam and has invited us, Islamic Studies, has invited us to do a session with his students at American University. So that's going to be, I think, around November 6th.
November, yeah.
Yeah, so that's very exciting. I would say that I've had some wonderful experiences in terms of twinnings often between Hillel and at certain universities, University of Southern California, I remember Stony Brook, Rutgers, other universities, NYU has done some really amazing work bringing together Muslim and Jewish students, and that's it's wonderful to have those experiences, because that youthful energy and idealism and willing to sort of speak and share your truth in ways that sometimes adults are a little bit more conservative or a little bit more careful. So that's very, very inspiring. So we're hoping that we'll be able to get out to more universities in the coming months. But it's definitely so important, you know. So
in fact, after we did the one at St. Francis College, they then came back to us and said that they would like a repeat of this with another set of students. So we're going to be doing that, I believe, in September.
Right.
That's awesome. Well, it sounds like you're doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
Was someone else going to ask? Ken, were you going to ask a question?
Yeah, I was going to say, this is maybe not for the group watching, but we're going to post this. A lot of times people, if it's an individual, they feel like, you know, what can I do? I'm just one person. And if I'm not already a member of something, but can you discuss what you would say to somebody that would ask that question? What can I do as one person?
I would say make a Muslim friend.
Right.
In fact, we started this campaign when somebody asked the question, what can I do? And it led into a Make a Muslim Friend program where, in this case, it was, you know, the houses of worship that put a call out and said, who would like to invite a group of Muslims into their homes? And 12 families volunteered. And then they organized it, they matched it, you know, who goes where, just to make sure that you're not sending a single man to a single woman's house, you know, all of that stuff. And then we did the reverse, you know, that the Muslims invited people of other faiths into their homes, and that kind of led to friendships. But then there are other experiences as well. I am part of an interfaith book club. And we read books of the Abrahamic faith. We rotate the faith book each month, and that has led to some very meaningful discussions. It could be something academic, or it could be a novel, and it could be fiction. That's another way. And sometimes it's through your children, you know, depending on your age group. If your children are in school together, that leads to inviting people into your homes. But there's something about being in a living room, you know, sitting on a sofa together or around a kitchen table that makes the conversation much more intimate and can lead from just getting to know one another to becoming friends. Walter?
Well said, Sabia. I wanted just to say actually something that's coming up in 2 days, which is that a group of us, and I believe Fatima will be with us, a group of us from a group called Jamaat, which stands for Jews and Muslims and Allies Acting Together, will be going out to DuPont Circle on Tuesday at 2 p.m. And we're basically just going to go out there and say, we are Muslims and Jews, and we're here because we want to let you know that we love each other, we're going to stand up for each other, and we're not going to let this conflict tear us apart. We'll say something about the conflict and probably very much along the lines of what Sabia and I rendered, but the main message is that we can't allow that to tear us apart because what we're doing is so important. So it's really kind of manifesting, it's kind of coming out of the closet, if you will, coming out in the streets and just sharing that truth with whoever's going to be in DuPont Circle that day. And you know, so we've done things like that in the past. We had a program called Spread Hummus Not Hate, where we would do similar things, but we haven't done this in a while. And I think this is the right time to do it. So it is very much, my whole philosophy has been, Ken, that the grassroots are really where it's at, and that to accentuate, we can't sit and wait for the rabbis and the imams or whatever organizational leaders to make this happen. Maybe they will eventually, but if we can reach out and make those friendships, make those connections, and as Sabia said, then take them into the living rooms, that's really what it's all about.
And, you know, it occurred to me that at one time I asked someone that we are preaching to the choir, and how do we take our message to people who are not willing to listen to us? And what she said is that these are the people who will not invite you, but they will invite people like me, meaning her. So tell your stories to us, and we will tell your stories to them. So my appeal would be that please tell people about not just the the work that we are doing. I mean, ask them to invite us. We are ready to go anywhere on Zoom. We can be anywhere at any time. And tell them about the book. Through stories, we try to get our message across. And the more people who read the book, we hope it'll have an impact. So I just made a plug.
Good for you. That's what this is all about.
Yes.
And nothing shameful about it either. I do shameless plugs.
Is the book in e-form? Is the book in e-form?
It is.
Yes. Okay.
It is in Kindle, and
Good,
I believe that it can put the, or maybe Alexandria put the link in the chat.
Okay.
I
both
have my
for the
Kindle
local-
version already.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
Yeah,
All
both
right,
the
see,
and that's what the hardcover looks like.
that's really nice. I like the cover. It's very bright and very,
It is.
Yeah. you know, I had a question to ask both of you. I don't know if anybody has further questions, please, you know, you can put them in the chat or you can wait till I'm done with my question. So anyway, here's my question to both of you. You know, we were talking a little bit about the Rumi Forum event, and that touched a little bit on, you know, some of the issues, including, you know, I don't know how to describe it, I guess maybe pushback or resistance, I'll say, from both of your respective faith communities. I mean, Walter, you know, what resistance did you get from the Jewish community for your work? And Sabiha, you know, similarly, can you describe, you know, situations where you've gotten resistance or, you know, negative feedback? You know, there's lots of ways to put it, from the Muslim community. So
well, I would first of all, I would say, Fatima, that I've gotten a lot less resistance than I expected. Honestly, that's why I said, you know, remember that whole thing I said about the best job in the world, because I was like expecting more, and so the fact that you know, over the years, as I said, there have been instances, there are difficult moments, but the overwhelming majority of Muslims and Jews that I've interacted with have been very supportive of this. And so what that tells me is that it's somehow, you know, maybe partly because because Israel, it's so, you know, there's this irony that as the Israel-Palestine thing was getting worse, what we were doing in this country was getting better. And I think partly it's people who are looking for an alternative because they were so downhearted by what was happening there that when this would come along, they would be very excited. There was, you know, it was also this a kind of curiosity to encounter the other and find out they were human beings, find out all the similarities in Judaism and Islam. So all of that. So overall, it has been very positive. As I said, there have been times where I have encountered, you know, resistance in my own community. Certainly, I would have to say that in my earlier career as a journalist covering Israel, and I would speak out, and I would sometimes write out op-eds that would get people pretty angry at me and call me names. Self-hating Jew is one of them, one of the less nice ones. But you know, again, but on this, maybe we've evolved more by this time, but it's been much better, and maybe it's also a little bit less cutting, you know, kind of dangerous in some way to be building Muslim-Jewish relations than, say, advocating for Palestinians or something, you know. So those are some thoughts.
When my husband and I started engaging in interfaith dialogues in the 80s, even earlier than that, at that time, it wasn't as much as a resistance, but it was a lack of interest. And it wasn't related to the Jewish community. It was just a lack of interest in general. Most of us were immigrants, and we felt that, well, most of the people felt that it was more important to focus on building a Muslim community and making good Muslims out of your children, and not dilute your efforts by trying to do too much. and interfaith dialogue was felt as, it's not really necessary. There was also a sense that it's no use. It was like a defeatist attitude. Oh, what's the point? It's no use. The media is going to continue to present us as terrorists, and they're too powerful. So what's the point? Why waste your time? All of that changed after 9/11. And that's when the Muslim community woke up to the fact that they needed to do a better job of making themselves known, that a lot of the problems that they were facing was because they were not known. And so people who were antagonistic towards the Muslim community were antagonistic because their perception had been shaped by what they were hearing. And so in-reach was important, but they started doing outreach and started engaging with faith communities and with civic communities. And as a consequence, then when the 2016 election took place and Islamophobia was on the rise, the relationships that we developed with other communities had a positive impact, and that's when people stood by us. So that over the years, it has become less and less of a challenge engaging, in interfaith dialogue. But going back to what I said previously, I still face, and I hear this everywhere, wherever I go, when it comes to, like, okay, what is the sisterhood doing? Well, we're trying to open a chapter, but we don't have enough Muslim women, joining the chapter. We just closed our chapter because the Muslim women dropped out. So that remains a problem. And as I said, I'm not sure what is causing that.
Sabia, I think one of the things that has been suggested as a potential problem is demographics. I think
Yes.
Many of the Muslim sisters may be at a point in their lives where they have, small children, and they're having to take care of them and work and take care of the house. And, while there may be interest, there's just not enough hours in the day. Hopefully, if that's the case, that, that remains hopeful for the future, because it means you'll have a whole bunch of really interested women in about 10 years when their kids go off to college. So,
yes.
Anyway.
I agree with Fatima. I do think it's demographic. I think that the Muslim community tends to be a newer community. I mean, granted, there are Muslim communities that have been here for a long time, but the bulk of the Muslim community across the United States is younger, is newer. And whereas most of the sisters in our chapters are my age or not quite my age. I'm very venerable, but still, we're at a different place. Many of us are retired. Certainly our children are grown. So I think that is part of it. I think there's a certain amount of conservatism with some of the immigrant community, where perhaps some of the husbands are questioning or whatever. I think there's a small bit of that as well. I don't think it's necessarily the largest component, but I think when you add this component and that component and this component, it definitely is a challenge. I had to wait several years before I could join a chapter, before we could have enough balancing Muslim sisters. We could have filled with old Jewish women, many chapters. But we will wait. We will be here. We will walk beside you, sister, and we will wait and walk together.
Thank you, Lorraine. I love your spirit. And, I just want to point out that to everybody that Lorraine is a rocket scientist. She really is. When she told me that, I'm like, no, come on, tell me what you really do. And she goes, no, I'm really a rocket scientist. And I'm like, wow, I was so impressed.
Well, but that was in a former life before I decided I had to balance the karma of my life and try going into social justice. So I could only finally retire after a fourth time after I had balanced rocket science and more years in social justice. So
Right.
yeah, that was then. This is now.
So, does anybody have any other questions?
I see that Audrey has put a question in the chat.
Audrey, did you want me to read the question or did you want to read it yourself?
It was just, this discussion really made me think about my aunt who's been teaching an interfaith marriage workshop for years, and how much this aligns with the kinds of things they discuss. And I'd just love to send her the recording, and I'll recommend the book to her.
And ask her to invite us.
Okay, I will.
Zoom makes it so much easier to schedule something. Yeah.
Sure.
No, I wanted to, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to add on following up on what you were just talking about and the pushback, but where, are the demographics changing? I'm involved with One Journey, which celebrates refugees' contributions, but we find ourselves overlapping. It started as an interfaith group, and it overlaps with lots of cultures, countries, people coming here, but the newer base of people coming here, and there is interest we're finding on university campuses that we were talking about before, you were talking about, but in high schools, and the newcomers, when they're involved in an activity or an initiative, they'll get involved, and that leads to discussions and interaction. We created a refugee mask maker groups, and it was all people coming here from Afghanistan who as new Americans, but it led to conversations and those kind of things. And our community events do the same thing. So there seems to be lots of venues, as you discovered, to bring people together. To organize, that's a different story.
Yeah, and these are unplanned and spontaneous, and there's a lot to be said about that, which reminds me of my conversations with my neighbors. We never planned that. It happened. It just happened.
Yeah.
And I've got to tell you that when I started your book, there's an anecdote at the beginning where you talk about it. Somebody, I think Walter talks about a meeting, and somebody says, "Where are the Muslims here?" And somebody says, "This must be what heaven is like."
Yes, yes.
Somebody at our first festival came up to one of the organizers and said that exact same thing, because it was people from all faiths, all cultures. The performers were former refugees, and somebody just came up and was just blown away, and it said exactly that. This must be what heaven's like. So I thought I would share that with you. I was excited when I saw that.
Thank you, Ken. I just want to go back to I want to make sure that Audrey had a chance to ask if she had a question. I think I just want to make sure that you had completed your thought and or question.
Yeah, I was just really, the only real question was, is this recording going to be available, and how do I?
Okay. I wasn't sure whether you finished your, thank you. Yeah. Well, gosh, I am just thrilled that you're both here. It makes me think that, we are well overdue for another LBJ, reunion. And since we've got four alums, including myself on this call. Anyway, so, one of the things that sort of jumped out at me as you were both talking, Sabia and Walter, two things that really resonated with me is one, how we can see things like you mentioned the golden calf story in the Hebrew Bible, and then what's in the Quran as well about that same thing. And it brings to mind a well-known proverb, which is that you can criticize your mother, but nobody else can. And it's one of those things that I think it's human nature. So it's just something to keep in mind. And the other one that you talked about also brought to mind another sort of saying, I guess, what Mother Teresa used to say, which is if you want peace, you need to speak to your adversaries.
Right.
You don't speak to your friends.
Right.
Because you have to find out the source of the friction, the source of the misalignment,
Right.
for lack of a better word. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. That's right, Fatima, and make that adversary into a friend by the encounter, and so that's. I mean, I think that's the work we've been doing, and it's gone really, really well. But obviously, at moments like this, it's not easy, and I you know. You just feel the the passion out there on both sides in recent days, and the emails that are coming, and the texts, and oh my God, somebody who I just now would never have expected had written this very fire-eating op-ed or a statement, or there's all these statements out there. Everybody's full of self-righteousness and pain, and it's all true. But it's just so important that we stay together, that we don't let this tear us apart, and that we continue to hear the other, and we don't necessarily always have to agree, but just to understand why it's so important that we be together. The other thing is that we're Sabi and I have done this Muslim and Jewish work, but we're also about all groups in American society having these kind of encounters, and we hope that if Muslims and Jews can do this, then maybe everybody can do this, because we come at it with this big thing between us that has really alienated us from each other, and yet we've accomplished a lot. So anyway, every morning we'll get up and say, we got to push this forward one more day and get over this hurdle and all that. But
well, I think it's at moments like this that I hear this weird sound. I'm sorry. Okay, now it's gone. I think it's at moments like this that our two communities in particular, and of course our allies, everybody else too, needs to come together. We need to use this moment of distress and tension and intensity, or lots of ways to describe it, to come together and to find a solution. Sabiha, were you going to? I'm sorry, somebody else was going to say something else.
I had a couple more questions.
Oh, please, yeah.
Okay, so I was wondering, so I think the one-to-one relationships are critically important, as you said, because it's kind of like the trainer approach. Like people will carry your stories and your message forward. But at the macro level, I was wondering, is there anything else? Are there organizations, or are there other strategies that can assist with the framing of these issues? Because I think people react to headlines and images on the screen. And so is there anything more that we can do to educate, these larger organizations that have so much power over people's imaginations on how to, humanize and show the commonality among the different groups? Just wondering if that comes up in the work that you do.
Walter?
One quick thing was that when I got started in this work in around 2006, 2008. I mentioned that I got involved with the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding, which is it's not officially Jewish, but it's headed by an Orthodox rabbi. It's basically a Jewish organization, which is about reaching out to Muslims, to African Americans, to other constituencies. And the fact was that the large Jewish organizations at that time, the Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Committee, and others, were really holding back. They were, not coming. They were not. It took about close to 10 years for them to really say, okay, we're going to talk to the Islamic Society of North America, for example. They're still not totally comfortable talking to CARE. But I think those of us, pioneers with smaller organizations, and there were, again, many rabbis and imams and people who got involved in this work, and it did finally bring, I think, the larger organizations around to the point where they They did engage with ISNA. In fact, the American Jewish Committee and ISNA formed this group called MJAC, I think it is, which has done important work on Capitol Hill on hate crimes legislation. So it is a process of kind of normalizing it and what's the word, bringing some of the big players into the table. Even if I don't necessarily, yeah.
Yeah, I can think of two other examples. One is the Muslim Jewish Solidarity Committee. And again, this is something Walter, had a big hand in making happen, because when Walter was doing the twinning events, this was like an annual thing. And there was a sense that we don't want to wait for a major holiday to come for us to get together. We should be doing something year round. And that's what gave rise to the Muslim Jewish Solidarity Committee all over the United States. And the one in New York, which I am a part of, is doing exactly that. They are rolling out events all the time. It was much more robust before the pandemic, which could be anything from let's take a walk in an ethnic neighborhood, the Yemeni neighborhood in Brooklyn, and taste their cuisines, to a class in calligraphy, to a cultural event where the music and dances of each culture are presented, to a book reading, a cooking class, and then of course there's iftars and all of the and seders all combined in that as well, and that's happening on an organizational level. The other that comes to my mind is a program called Scriptural Reasoning, and it comes out of the Rose Castle Foundation in the UK, which has that program going on here in the United States. This is for the 3 Abrahamic faiths to study the scriptures, and I'm part of that as well. And we pick a topic, and then there's somebody who curates who will select the text from each of the texts, and then there is a very structured methodology through which we engage in the discussion. We are trained facilitators, and then we have breakout sessions, and we're doing it very well on Zoom every month, and we study the scriptures, and that is also very, very unifying. I also am engaged with the Temple Emmanuel here in New York City, where we have a Torah Quran study group going once a month in the mornings. But that's at a smaller scale. That's not like a big organizational level. So those are just some other examples of things being done at the macro level. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think that's important to bring those groups together because then before one of those major organizations issues a statement that they've already been educated.
Yes, well said, Alexandra.
Yeah, that's important. The other question I had was, I know tonight that we are specifically talking about Jewish and Muslim relations, but because we're an interfaith group, I was wondering if you have any other guidance for us or suggestions of how we can take this same concept and expand it to, let's say, Hindu-Muslim relations, or just other groups where there may have been some traditional conflict, where it's monotheistic versus polytheistic, and you don't have the same opportunity to say we have this same common roots of the Abrahamic faith.
Yeah, one of the things that works very well is working on a project or a cause that is important to you.
Okay.
For example, we have a program here. I say we because I participate in it, called Muslim Volunteers for New York. And these are some young Muslim families who started this. And what they do is that they partner with existing organizations like Meals and Wheels and like a book project, and they will hold events. One coming up next is cleaning up the park on the Upper East Side, where all the families will descend, and with the children and with the husbands and everybody else, and the politicians come, elected officials, and you actually rake and clean up and plant bulbs and do all of that. And we do that in the spring and in the fall. They've also partnered with an organization that distributes books to schools that are disadvantaged, so people of all faiths, will just come together, they'll invite everybody, and you're not talking about your faith, but you're working together on something that means something to you. They'll do Valentine's Day project, Thanksgiving, Ramadan drive, all kinds of initiatives like that. And anybody of any faith can be a participant over there, and then you end up, working on something that's important to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question.
Well, it looks like we're kind of getting towards the end of our time, but
Yes.
if anybody has, another question, I think we can maybe take one more if they, if anybody's holding back and really wants to ask a question. Go ahead. Going once, going twice.
Well, I'll take you up on it.
Okay, I knew you would.
Well,
Go ahead.
I put it in the chat. Walter, you mentioned earlier about groups on the ground in Israel and Palestine that you'd worked with. My question was, I don't want to list now, but where would I go about finding out more about them? I'm speaking as the United Methodist in the room tonight, and there are groups in Virginia. For Virginia's Board of Church and Society, which you probably know from their Maryland Avenue group. But anyway, we've got folks that are interested in this and would might want to follow up. So.
Okay, well, I know, several that I've had personal contacts with. There's many, but for example, the Project Rosanna that I think I talked about. So we are going to be building, doing some fundraising, I think, going forward for certain efforts that Project Rosanna is doing, and we've had Christians also involved in that. Let's see, which church was it? The wonderful church up on in Bethesda. Sorry, I'm blanking it out. Presbyterian, Episcopal Church. The St. John's Norwood has been a big supporter. So again, to bring these faith communities again who care, because obviously the Christian community cares deeply about about the situation there, and it is, Christian Holy Land, and so it's been a pleasure working with them, and I hope so. I'd be happy to talk, think with, brainstorm with you further, in terms of Project Rosanna. So that's one. There's a group called that I'm really in love with over there called the Interfaith Encounter Association, which is an umbrella body, not that well known, but they have more than 100, what do you call them? Branches or local groups, all over Israel and the West Bank that hold discussions mostly focused on faith, on Judaism, Islam, and Christianity.
It's called Interfaith Encounter what?
Association.
Association. Okay.
Yeah, IEA, Interfaith. I could send you the link if you need it, but I think you'll find it if you go Interfaith.
Yeah, I could probably find it.
Israel Interfaith Encounter Association Israel. They are absolutely wonderful, and I could have, if you wanted to, I could connect you with one of their leaders, who happens to be an American Jew who's here part of the time. He's mostly over there. Right now, obviously, they're over their heads with what's going on, but
I'll bet
they do just such wonderful work.
Okay, good to know.
Those are two that I can think of. Yeah.
Thanks.
So before we leave, can I have your permission to take a screenshot?
Please do. Yeah. And if anybody wants to come off of, you don't have to I don't want you to poof disappear.
Smile.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I guess this brings us to the end of our program. I mean, we could be here for a lot longer, and I know that, a lot of, more wonderful questions will come up, but we do need to let Walter and Sabiha go. And I just want to thank both of them so much for everything that they are doing to repair the world, whether it's Islah or Tikkun Olam. You guys are doing an amazing job. And Tikkun Olam, you guys are doing an amazing job. And
so are you, Fatima, and
Yeah.
so is Arlington Dems, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You
Thank you.
inspire me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, everyone. Well, good night. Have a good one and
Thank you.
stay connected.
Thank you. Thank you
We
for
will.
inviting
We
us.
will.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
Everyone.
Be well, be
Bye.
safe.
Good.
Good night.
Thank you so much,
Thank
both of you, and to everyone who joined tonight.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording now.